Hey everybody, this is Dr. Frank Chopatini with the Church of Rational Truth. Today we're going to do a lecture on child stardom and whether it is or is not moral. First off, I'm going to say, like most things, most topics, morality is a spectrum, highly dependent on the individual circumstances. And today, this isn't so much of saying, yes, it is moral, yes, it is immoral to have child stardom, but it's more of trying to delve into what aspects of it should you be looking at in terms of individually determining, is this a potentially immoral situation, or are we starting to slip into the side where this thing is becoming immoral and no longer something that is moral anymore? I don't want to put an overarching like, oh, it's always immoral to make your child a star. Not necessarily true at all. But this is kind of more to dive in and start teasing apart child stardom. We're going to include anything that basically puts someone who is young, usually under 18, maybe even under 20, into the public sphere. I use child stardom because that's the most obvious. Things like Shirley Temple, you take a little child, and now boom, they've blown up, and everybody knows about them. But this lecture can also be true for political figures. I know a lot of times children are used as a political pawn, or they're put up on a podium for people to see. I would include that. Basically, anything that gets someone a lot of media attention or to be known as kind of a public figure, yet they are younger than the age of consent. Um, One of the biggest things I would say in terms of the morality is that lack of consent. I want to draw some parallels here. Not that this is the same morality as child sexuality, but you see a lot of similarities between this and child sexuality in that the child is not able to consent or fully understand the implications of these actions, especially the younger the child gets. They aren't able to see the big picture. They're not able to understand the good and bad about what's going to happen. They aren't able to see or predict as well what is going to happen in the future. They don't have the experience. They don't necessarily have the willpower or the mental capability of seeing those things. So that is probably one of the biggest moral issues. Now, the inability to consent isn't necessarily enough to say that this is just completely immoral, but it is a big factor. It is an issue because you would have to hope that everyone else who is included in this scenario or the situation actually has the child's best interests at heart, and they are watching for morality because hopefully someone else is becoming the barometer of what is proper for that child, or the barometer of what is moral or immoral for that child to do. So the next thing that I would look into for the morality of if a situation is moral or not is conflict of interest. Is there a clear conflict of interest here between what is best for the child in the situation and what's best for everyone else involved? Is it best for the parents? Is it best for a producer? Are there other people here who are going to be gaining who probably don't have the most unbiased opinions? If a parent is potentially going to get fame, fortune from this, that means they're going to be a little bit biased. They can't really make a true decision on what is best for that child if they're going to have some of their own incentive. People like producers or other people in the movie show business or even in politics, if you have a political party, they're trying to push some sort of agenda. They're trying to gain something out of it. They're going to be gaining money, political influence. They are not unbiased when making decisions for this child. So if you are going to say, well, this child can't consent, but we think it's in the best interest of this child, the we there needs to be someone who is as free of a conflict of interest as possible. Usually, in most cases, parents are probably free from a lot of conflict of interest, but if you look back in history, I'm sure you see lots of other ones where the parents are clearly getting some benefit out of this. In fact, in the US, many laws have been passed because of previous child stars being completely taken advantage of because of their parents. Their parents end up taking all their money, the child star ends up with nothing, and many laws were put into place and regulations put in place to prevent that because that child cannot make a good decision through their parents when their parents are gaining from it, especially when they're gaining at the cost of their child. So that would be another big aspect to delve into in a particular case of who is actually benefiting from this. Is the child actually benefiting from it? I would even argue it would be nice to have a third party like a guardian ad litem in divorce cases who is completely unbiased, unrelated to any party, does not get financial gain, and can help determine is this an actually right or moral decision for this child? Is this child benefiting in all aspects? And is it free from being coerced or moved into doing something that that child otherwise wouldn't do or wouldn't be ready to do because of their age and inability to understand the implications? Uh, Another issue is once someone becomes a public figure, a child star, a political pawn, it is done. If you put something out in the world, a lot of people who publish art, music, books, once you put it out there, you don't own it anymore. It is in the public. The public can do what they want with it. If you put out a video, like Star Wars Kid is a great example, that video once it gets published to the internet is there for good. You can't get rid of it. It's once it's out and copied, you can try as hard as you can, but there's always going to be a little bit left in there. It's like trying to get pee out of a swimming pool. If it's in there, you can try your hardest to get every little molecule out, but it's not going to be undone. So once a child becomes a public figure, it's out there. It's and that's important because if something, let's say, bad happens, they become a meme that's embarrassing, or let's just say they don't necessarily approve of it later. Well, you can't do anything after that. It's very hard to undo that. I know in certain circumstances, I know especially in like child sex abuse, there's laws that can prevent that from being distributed and sent out. But in terms of child stars, if you are in a movie that embarrasses the heck out of you, let's say Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you don't want to be Charlie anymore. Well, it's too late. The movie is made, it's published. You can't go and delete every single copy of that movie. It is out there. The public now owns it. So that's one big scary thing. That doesn't necessarily make it immoral, but that also makes it's more of that is a step that cannot be undone. So if you're pushing past that step, you need to be absolutely sure. You can't have second guesses. You can't be unsure that this is going to be correct. You need to be 100% certain this is going to be the right thing because once it's done, it's done. Um, I would say if you're looking at any specific case, and say, okay, is this moral? I would break it down to a couple of different sections. The first is just how young or how, more importantly, how capable is that child of consenting? If the child is very young, or I would say more importantly, very ignorant of the world, not that they're dumb, just that they don't have the experience, they don't know what happens with all these things. They haven't seen other cases. They're not able to reason these things. The same reason we don't like kids drive cars. They don't see all the implications. They can't understand them fully until they're old enough. Their brain is well developed enough. If they are very well developed, or let's say they're very advanced for their age, it becomes, I would say, less of a moral quandary because they can ration it out better. They can make more decisions for themselves, or they can understand better the decisions and their implications versus someone who is very young or very incapable. Let's say someone who is behind their age in mental development. That's much riskier. That child does not have full understanding of the implications. That once again, doesn't necessarily make it immoral, but that makes it very concerning that it could be taken advantage of or become immoral. And that's a time where you have to double down on checking, are we doing the right thing? The next one I would say is how popular or what is the potential exposure for this child? Is this going to be a local school play that 100 people are going to see and no one's going to record? Okay, not a lot of things at stake here. This isn't going to be make or break for a child's life. Worst case, it's an embarrassing thing that happens and they forget about it. That's really low stakes in terms of morality. Uh, if they're going to be on a national tour, they're going to be on a TV commercial that's seen nationally or internationally, they're going to be in a movie that's released, or something has, let's say, meme potential. Something can come out and this child is going to be made fun of, or they're just going to go down in history as a fool, or something that has the possibility of just continuing and getting a lot of viral attention. That's much scarier. You need to look with a fine tooth comb for that because that is very high stakes. That is something that could, ruin a child's life. And anything that is edging more on that side needs to be looked at much more carefully. Once again, not necessarily immoral, but that is where you have to watch much more closely on, are we doing this morally or immorally? In the same realm of potential exposure, I would say is what is the financial incentive, or what is the potential for bias for third parties? it once again, I'm going to use the school play. School play, no one's really making money. I mean, maybe a director gets some money off selling tickets or the school gets broken even from it, but no one's becoming rich. No one's becoming famous themselves off this child. Very low risk. Doesn't seem like many things can go wrong or become very immoral because no one's going to be highly biased in that situation. No one's going to push the child into doing something that they don't think is right, where there's less likely a chance. Now, does it happen sometimes? Yes. I'm sure there's a lot of theater parents who really are pushing children into it who really don't want to do it. But because there's not a huge make or break in that, that's less moral or less immoral because of the impact. The impact's not as much. Versus if you're talking about a child getting a multi-million-dollar record deal or a movie deal, or let's say their face is going to be all over the place and the parents end up getting interviewed or other people get more money or power from it, big red flags. You need to be much more careful in that. Once again, doesn't make it immoral, but it makes it very worrisome that something immoral like coercion can happen. Like a child is going to be pushed or a child is going to be made to do something that they wouldn't normally do or wouldn't normally benefit them. Those are more things that you should be watching out for. The last one is going to be just being free from bias, making sure that someone is there who is not biased to help be able to make this decision. Not just the child themselves, not necessarily just the parents themselves, but someone who can say, I really don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not really gaining from this. I can help guide whether this is the right thing for the child. Um, Someone who could say this child isn't being coerced. This child seems like this wants to do this. It seems like it is probably the best thing for this child in their life, and to be able to say, yeah, I do think this is going to be a good thing for them, or say, no, do you know what, maybe this is a bit too dangerous or might not be the right thing. Let's take a step back and hold off from this, even though there might be a lot of money, exposure, power, fame, whichever. But they can say, do you know what, looking at this, if this was me, knowing what I know now might not be the best thing. That way, the child can kind of be pushed into the right direction or not be pushed into the wrong direction by other factors. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other things that come down to it, but I would say those are some kind of big guidelines to look at whenever you have a child potentially getting a lot of fame or a lot of notoriety or basically just becoming part of a public figure or being known publicly. You should probably look at all those factors and really try to determine, is this moral to do this and put this child into this position, or are we slipping into the point where this is probably immoral and we should hold off on it or tone it down or modify it so that it's less likely to become immoral or not immoral. That's probably it for this lecture. I want to thank you all for tuning in. We'll come back hopefully next week with another lecture. If you have any suggestions, please let us know in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. This is Dr. Frank with the Church of Rational Truth, signing off.